Hello, everybody. If you're wondering why I'm looking a little moist and why this might be the first video you're seeing on my channel, let me explain. One, right now it is early September, and currently we are facing a pretty nasty heat wave, hence why I'm not going outside, but still staying hydrated and staying safe, so don't worry about that. And also, I decided that some of my older videos on music weren't quite up to snuff for my standards. Not to say that I have perfected my the way I speak about music, the way I talk about how I feel about albums or whatnot. But just that I feel that some of the opinions that I've held before have kind of shifted away from what they were then, and some sentiments and some ways that I would carry myself are just not how they don't represent me now. I don't want to, and I didn't feel comfortable having that kind of coexisting. So I've decided to somewhat start on a fresh page. And talk about something that I would say is familiar enough with me, but something that I've wanted to communicate more about. Now, whenever I talk about music, I always like to bring up some albums that I find to be pretty enjoyable, somewhat out of the expected popular picks, and that, you know, for me, it's sometimes like whenever whenever I talk about Led Zeppelin, usually I mention that In Through the Outdoor I think is a pretty enjoyable album, or I'll play defense for 90125, or Going for the One for Yes. But today I'm going to talk about a band that I would say I've been acquainted with for a good chunk of my musical journey, so to speak, and that is Black Sabbath. Now, I first got acquainted with Black Sabbath all the way back in junior year of high school. I want to say I started off by listening to a couple songs off of Paranoid and the debut, and probably a couple songs off of Volume 4, but I want to say that it wasn't until senior year that I got a little more serious about it. That's when I was listening to full albums instead of just individual tracks. Now, and that sort of led to me talking about music a little less, talking about music more as like on a grander scale than just individual songs sometimes, and also just kind of moving on beyond just kind of putting stuff on playlists. That sort of philosophy of putting stuff on playlists instead of listening to albums. I do put stuff on playlists. However, I do not. I don't believe that is the way to go all the way. I think that there's just some times where you just can't isolate songs from albums and just plop them onto playlists. There's especially if they flow together seamlessly, and that's the thing that that sort of happened with me when I was in my final years of high school. And when I was listening to Black Sabbath, I came across videos on YouTube that I found to be of my liking, talking about this band, as well as some other heavy bands, you know, your AC/DC, your Iron Maidens, your Rainbows and Deep Purples, and you know, all these other bands that I was starting to get somewhat of a familiarity with. And I was just curious as to like what other people's perspectives were, and maybe to also see some things where I just kind of not paid attention as much, and just figure out maybe, okay, is this like, do we stand on the same sort of plane here, or what's going on here? And that's what I always found fun about these. Now, of course, you have channels like Sea of Tranquility and the Contrarians, and more or less some channels where it's usually just like some individual guys in their bedroom with their record collections, just talking about this stuff. But one channel that I gravitated to somewhat, my musical journey, was now defunct channel, effectively, named Mountaintop 9. And one of the videos that I came across that kind of drew me to what I'm going to be talking about today was a video reviewing these two albums here, Technical Ecstasy and Never Say Die by Black Sabbath, from 1976 and 1978, respectively. Now, what I found interesting about this was that I hadn't really heard anything from these albums before, and that's probably because most cases, more so than not, Ozzy-era fans tend to go for some of the earlier parts of the catalog. That is, from the debut up to, say, Volume 4 and Sabbath Bloody Sabbath. Any further than that, and you're kind of breaking, kind of starting to break the glass a little. For example, there's maybe not too many songs that you'll get off of Ozzy fans talking about from Sabotage, and forget getting anything here. There's maybe a couple of songs that people will go for. I won't speak too much on this, but I do know that Dirty Women is a track that was played at a couple of their last concerts during the farewell tour. I forget what it was called exactly, but essentially at Black Sabbath's farewell tour, Dirty Women was played, at least in one of the shows. Someone can fill me in on that down in the comments, perhaps. But Never Say Die is an album that I found a bit of intrigue in, because I don't know of too many of the tracks that were played from it, aside from in concerts at the time. Well, aside from what was being toured. So, of course, you have the title track, and I think A Hard Road came out as a single. But aside from that, I don't know of too many other tracks that were played live from that. And it boggles my mind, because there does seem to be a lot of stuff on there that I would say would be fit for being good live cuts. And now, of course, I did go into both these albums with sort of an open mind and clean ears. I didn't listen to any of the tracks beforehand. I just decided, all right, I'm just going to put these on and just see what happens. And, well, needless to say, I still find myself coming back to this album quite often. It's one that I think, since it hasn't been talked about to death, it's still maintained a freshness. But at the same time, it's a very familiar album to me, and it's one that I had to kind of learn to love. That's the sort of thing that that I like about it. Now, here's the thing about music for me, is that there's albums where sometimes on the first try, I get it. It just kind of flows in, you know, just starts flowing straight through my brain, and by the end of it, I've gotten it. There's no question about it. I'm as good as I'll need to be for the day, and I'll be pretty content with what I've heard. And then there's albums like this where I find it good, but I'm not sure if I entirely get it. And then I try again, and then I try again, and then I try again. And that's to say, this isn't my favorite Black Sabbath album. It's approaching my favorites, I will say that. But it is the one that I've learned to appreciate the most, I would say. That and probably some other albums later on in their career. But it's one that I've found is it's just a very interesting sort of late 70s hard rock album. Now, as a little background for this, at the same year that this came out, you also had some other heavy acts that were kind of taking over Black Sabbath's place in the pantheon of hard rock. Of course, you had AC/DC, you had Judas Priest, Scorpions, and also New Kids on the Block, Van Halen. Fun fact, Van Halen actually opened for Black Sabbath on their Never Say Die tour. Of course, you can probably find some really frustrating anecdotes of how that tour went. Needless to say, it didn't end well. And Ozzy Osbourne was fired from the band the next year. But I won't get too much into the history. There's probably loads of books on this. Martin Popoff has probably written about it before. I know Tony Iommi has certainly written on it before. But I'm here to talk about the tunes. What makes this album so great to me? Well, I'll start it off. First off, it opens with a pretty damn good opener. Never Say Die, the title track. Really up-tempo, fast-paced, sort of punky number, which I'd say, yeah, a lot of folks, if you'll talk to folk like Ozzy era fans about this album, they'll find the title track to be one of the few tracks that they'll gravitate towards, which that's good. It's not a case of me thinking like, oh, that's as far as I'll go. Wow, what a pity. I think it's a good sort of entryway, but I don't think it's quite enough. It doesn't entirely it doesn't tell the whole picture of the album for me. But it is one that I would say is an enjoyable track for me. So overall, great intro, and on we go to the second track, which is where I think the album kind of starts off for me, is Johnny Blade. This sort of, again, a punky number, but with a bit of a twist, or several twists, that is. Because first off, it starts off with a keyboard intro by Don Airey, who would join with Rainbow, and later on with Deep Purple after the retirement of John Lord. So there's that little bit, and it's a very nice spooky little intro too, which I found to be very sort of strange when I first listened to it. But you just it's a very interesting song too, just about this cold-blooded gangster who just slices up people with a switchblade, and it is a bit hokey. The lyrics are a bit hokey, but I can't help but find it a very sort of badass and addicting song, especially once you get to the midsection where it amps up to a much slower, doomy sort of track. So it's kind of the best of both worlds. You get a sort of fast-paced rocker, and then it slows down to this trudging crawl, which I really love that about this song. I love the sort of that nice little transition there, and then it just amps up again with more keyboards by Don Airey into this really just fiery shit hot sort of Tony Iommi solo. It's really incredible, I think. So once it gets up to that point, then you get to Junior's Eyes, which I'd say tied with Johnny Blade. This is probably my favorite track off the first side of the album. We're in good hands right now, and because this song, it's certainly one that it really gets to me. There's a couple of Black Sabbath songs where I listen to them and it really does touch me. I'd say I think off of this album, you know, It's Alright is another one that I find really touching. Or Solitude off of Master of Reality. I find those songs to be really just really touching. And there is, of course, another one on here that I have a lot of appreciation for, but I'll save that till later. And so this is it's a very sort of sad song, just and it is accentuated by knowing that around this time Ozzy Osbourne's father had passed away, so he was you can feel that emotion just kind of injected into it. And I just love how Iommi's guitars just really, it just feels so nicely just injected into it. As I probably said that already. However, I just can't help but feel that being an appropriate statement for this. It just feels like a wave of emotion just put on you from it. It's a song that I would say it's one of those few songs that I would say genuinely does make me feel sad, because it really does. I mean, for one, it does kind of hit close to home, and also it's just the lyrics just really cut right through. It's just brilliant, I think. But then I think we kind of hit a snag in side A with A Hard Road, which I don't quite understand why some folks say it is one of the more enjoyable tracks on this album, or find it an enjoyable track to begin with. I just never really found it to be a track that I could get into. For me, it just kind of felt like I do like that sort of driving feeling of it, but it just kind of doesn't feel like it progresses anywhere. And the lyrics, 50-50, I don't know. They feel a little dull for me, so I don't quite gel with them so much. But then side B, it's an interesting little affair. More tracks on there to speak of, because Hard Road ate up a lot of side A. But this one's one where I have the most to talk about here, because this is this is a side that I've had to kind of work with the most. And opening side B is Shockwave. Now, when I was younger, Shockwave would be one of those tracks that I was kind of 50-50 on. It was heavy, so that was good for me, but I didn't quite get what was going on. So in consequence, it just kind of went over my head sometimes. Or I found parts of it nice, you know. I liked the chorus. I loved just how it flowed, and then you had that sort of look behind you, that sort of bit, and then of course the sort of around the second or third chorus, really, you have these sort of ooh, sort of things. But if you're familiar with the song, you'll know what I'm talking about. But when I revisited this album about last month or so, I found myself really falling in love with this song again. And I'll tell you what it is. For one, you have this sort of first off, the lyrics do kind of have an ominous touch to them. Just look them up right now. You know, bad moon rising in a blood red sky, and the chorus itself, I don't quite remember, but it does have a sort of spooky undertone to it. But you wouldn't know it because it does kind of have a cheery sound to it, a little almost a little poppy, but for me, it's a song where when I listen to it, it feels like you're getting shot at all sides with just what it wants to be. And I think that's what I really like about it. Like, you have an acoustic sting at one point, and then after at maybe 2 different points, you have these little doomy interludes, which I really like that about it. I really do like that it feels like a sort of it's a really sort of progressive song, and this is what I like about Sabbath. I love it when Sabbath gets progressive. It's why Sabotage is among my favorites, and it's why Never Say Die is really up there for me, because it isn't afraid to take chances with its sound. And also, I should say, Sabbath Bloody Sabbath is also a progressive album in that regard. But what I like about this is that it doesn't just stick to one sound. You've got punky songs, you've got songs with really sort of doomy parts in them, and you've even got some lighter songs, which I'll talk about soon. But for Shockwave, I just keep coming back to this song because it is just such a... It's a potpourri of just so much, just different sorts of ways of Black Sabbath being heavy. And it just keeps your head turning. I think another song which kind of gives me the same sort of feelings about, in terms of how it sounds, where I wasn't sure if I liked it or not at first, but then really came to love it, is Killing Herself to Live off of Sabbath Bloody Sabbath. Because it feels like there's so many, it's kind of tearing you apart in so many different ways. This song is just it pushed to 11, I think. And it's almost like listening to a 10cc song for me. Like if you listen to something like Clockwork Creep or a Mandy Fly Me, or a good example, another good example would probably be I Want to Rule the World. I could just pick a ton of those really lovely, you know, when Godley and Kramer were still in the band, all those really lovely 10cc songs where they cram in what would be effectively a prog rock epic in like at least like in under 2 minutes, or at least at the very most like 5 minutes. That is almost what this is. And I think Shockwave goes at least over 5 minutes, so roughly that long. It does feel like you've been just you've got this nice condensed sort of heavy song with like all these sorts of weird little windows of heaviness all over the place, is what I'd like to say. It's frankly probably my favorite track off the album for me now. If you would have asked me a couple of years ago, I would have said Johnny Blade or Junior's Eyes, or this next one that I'm going to be talking about, which is Air Dance. This one is a real head turner when you first listen to it. Now, it does start off a little heavy, but the guitars have a bit of a lighter feel. I don't know how to describe some parts of this, of the heaviness for this album, because there's some parts of this album where it is heavy on paper. However, it sounds light. I don't know how to describe it, but like for example, on for the start of Shockwave, which I'll stop talking about it after this, but it has this sort of a lighter sound, but you can definitely tell it's heavy. If you were to transplant that into another song, it's not something that you'd say is light and airy. But with Air Dance, it also has that sort of quality too. But it doesn't maintain that for long, because this song is probably the most out there Black Sabbath have ever gone for, like, even for mellow Black Sabbath songs. This is effectively like a jazz fusion track. It is very, very out there for Black Sabbath, and that's why I love it so much for this album. If you asked me about a year ago what my favorite track from Never Say Die was, I would have said without any hesitation, Air Dance, and then below that, Johnny Blade and Junior's Eyes. No hesitation there. And I still have a lot of love for this song in my heart. Matter of fact, I'd go as far as to say it's one of my favorite songs ever. Which is a very, very daunting thing to say. And it's something a little... it's a little... I'm kind of jumping the shark by saying this, because there's probably oodles of other songs that I could say, this is my favorite song ever. That's my favorite song ever. But no, this song, I feel, there's just something about it that just really draws me to it. I think it's because, well, for one, the lyrics are very melancholy, and also just the way of how it sounds. Especially that sort of little interlude where where I think Ozzy, I think pretty much halfway through the song, you just don't get any more vocals, and it's just an instrumental at that point, where the guitars, where it just sounds a little wistful, and you have those like nice swirling synths by Don Airy, those fun little synth effects that I love from the late 70s, and then It does get a little heavy around near the end, but it doesn't really get too heavy. It's a pretty lightweight song all around. And then once it and then it just keeps going on, fading out. I don't know. Just overall, a really addictive track for me. I honestly just love this song to bits. There's probably a couple of folks here that probably sit on the same, that are sitting on the same side as me on this one. But there's a lot of folks who will have it out for this song because of how just totally different it is for Black Sabbath. But just for me, it just makes sense to me. And I think that's what works for it. But then we get something a little lighter again with "Over to You," which is actually the last time you'll hear Ozzy Osbourne singing on this album. And frankly, I'm not too big on this track. It's not bad. There's Ozzy era songs, Black Sabbath, that I find not as enjoyable or close to bad. For example, Am I Going Insane, in parentheses, Radio, is not a song I would put on very often, and I would probably go as far as to say it is annoying. I don't care for it, frankly. Who Are You almost takes that, but you know, Who Are You from Sabbath Bloody Sabbath almost takes that point, but I find that one to be a bit of a... It does have a doomy sound to it, even though it's mostly keyboards, and it does sound a little ominous. So I'll give it that. That it does sort of carry that sort of emotion in it. But Over to You just kind of feels like nothing. For me, whenever I listen to it, it just kind of feels like in one ear, out the other. It just kind of feels like they're trying to do that sort of... I don't know. It's them trying to do sort of an easy listening sort of song, but just not quite succeeding at what Air Dance did for me. So, that's probably down below. Probably almost takes the place of my least favorite song on this album, alongside A Hard Road. And then we go to the final chunk of the album. And I'm going to say a chunk because these two tracks, they segue into each other. And so I would say listen to these both together in order to kind of get that sort of experience of what I'm talking about. And that is Breakout and Swinging the Chain. Now, if you asked me about a year ago or even 2 years ago or even a year ago, I would have said that Breakout was probably the worst track on this album. I'm not quite of that opinion anymore, but there's probably some reasons why some folks do not like this track at all. There's probably a lot of folks who aren't too big on saxophones. That is to say, this track is pretty much it's an instrumental, which Ozzy basically just gave up with. He didn't want to have any part of it, apparently. He didn't want to put any vocals on it. But I just find it a very interesting track. For one, it is a bit doomy. If you try to cancel out the saxophones and if you really focus on what's going on in the background, it's just this really simple sort of doomy riff. It's not very creative. It's a little bog standard. But what I do like about it is that it really does have an ominous sort of touch to it. And also Bill Ward's really slow drumming on there. Just that sort of... It just feels very... like, I don't know. Like, just thinking about it right now, it just feels perfect because, you know... It just feels like something I'd listen to on a hot day. It feels like hell in a track that probably goes on for at least 2 minutes. When then it just segues right into Swinging the Chain, which is sung by Bill Ward. And it's also the final track you'll ever hear Bill Ward sing on. Of course, he also sang on It's Alright, I don't know what else he sang on off the top of my head, but if anyone wants to toss some more knowledge in the comments, go ahead. But I find this to be a pretty enjoyable song. Nice heavy riff. Also got some harmonica tossed in there. Pretty nice, sort of, just sort of a nice swaggering, sort of, kind of upbeat song. A little sad too, but I just find it a really interesting sort of closer. It's not one of my favorite songs from Black Sabbath, but it is one that I do find somewhat enjoyable because it does have a bit of a strange touch to it. For me, it's there's just some album closers that just feel a bit off, or I just feel like that's what they chose to close with, I guess. Like for example, I don't know what I would say would be like, for example, for me, a closer that just kind of baffles me every time is, I would say, Rock and Roll Ain't Noise Pollution by AC/DC off of Back in Black. Child of Vision by Supertramp off of, what is that album called? Breakfast in America. And just, well, those are just what come to mind. Well, okay, the first one's more so, like, really... It's more so of disappointment. Like, this isn't quite what they could have put on, right? And then the latter one is, this isn't quite what I was expecting, but I'm not disappointed by it. But let's just say that. This is just a track where I find myself just thinking, it feels like there should be something more after that. But it just feels that way because this is the final track off of what's effectively the last of the Ozzy era albums. I wouldn't consider 13 part of the Ozzy era, mostly because, well, you have at least like 30 years between all these albums, or rather 40 years between all these albums. But this album, it really just, when it closes like that, it really just feels... Like, I mean, putting myself in the shoes of someone who probably who would be listening to Black Sabbath at that moment, like about 45 years ago at this point, you would be thinking, well, what are they going to do next? I think it does leave you sort of wondering what's coming on next. And, well, unbeknownst to probably a bunch of people, you have, Blizzard of Oz and Heaven and Hell coming out 2 years after, so there is some respite for that sort of doubt as to like what the future of Ozzy Osbourne and Black Sabbath would be. But what I would say overall, if I were to be charitable, this for me it's like 4 out of 5 for me. It's not the best that I'd say Black Sabbath have ever done, but it's certainly it's an album that's gained my trust, which I think it can be hard to do sometimes because really getting into an album. Now, this is something I've kind of learned as I keep listening to music and as I keep sort of trying to expand my knowledge of bands and albums and whatnot. What I've learned is that it doesn't take just one. It certainly doesn't take one play to just know an album. That doesn't work. That doesn't work at all. But you could certainly enjoy an album after one play, and then that's why you go and revisit it again, maybe twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times if you're really daunting, within the same sitting. But when you have that time to keep revisiting an album over and over again, and when you're willing to give it a chance, and when you're willing to open your mind up to maybe other ways to interpret it or whatever, that's when you really truly get to know an album. And that's why I'll say there's probably like loads of albums that I've already listened to where there's probably albums I don't like right now, that I've just cast off that maybe 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, I'll come back and say, you know what, maybe I was a little too harsh on it. After all, I've only just started, and with this sort of journey, 5 years in isn't enough really to form like completely rock solid music opinions on everything. So I'm just starting with what I know. And I'm saying this ain't a bad album to listen to. If you're getting into Black Sabbath, and if you're wanting to kind of test the waters further from, you know, the acclaimed stuff, the stuff that folks will generally point you in the direction of, your Paranoids, your Masters of Realities, your Volume 4s. This isn't a bad album to listen to if you really want to try something new. Try something a little daunting. I've been using that word a lot. Yeah. But it certainly does, it really does kind of give you another perspective of the band. And I do like it whenever some bands are a little daring with their sound. That's why I like Deep Purple during the Coverdale Hughes era. It's why I like, you know, just well, that's a good example right there. There we go. Deep Purple with Coverdale and Hughes, because a lot of folks, whenever I talk to them about Deep Purple, they will just cast off those albums. They just want to hear, you know, what was with Ian Gillan and Richard Blackmore. But, you know, as soon as you start talking about Come Taste the Band or Stormbringer, they're just phoning out. Burn, maybe they'll have a little bit of appreciation for. But personally, I just say this ain't a bad album to go with. Is it the best hard rock album, heavy metal album of 1978? No, not really. I'd probably say that if you wanted to go for something that is more consistent in how heavy it is, and in terms of and probably outclasses it, I'd say debut Van Halen or Stained Class by Judas Priest. But you know, it's not one that I think is terrible. I'm at a loss to say that there's terrible Black Sabbath albums. There's ones that I certainly don't like more than others, but I would say after watching this, you know, after you've heard my spiel, give this a listen. Give this a fair listen. Tell me in the comments what you think about this album, and or what you think about what I had to say about this, because I'd love to hear what other people have to say, and you know, I've been dwelling on sort of talking about music for a while, because there's so many there's a lot of things I feel like I'd have to say, and there's a lot that I've got in my collection, a lot of stuff that I've gathered over the years from listening, and also just stories in general that I'd love to share. So, you know, just I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you, you know, find something off this you enjoy, and of course, you know, keep listening. Of course, just whatever it is, old, new, whatever works for you. Just make sure to keep going with whatever it is. Bye.